From the Human Rights Watch organization's perspective, it is every nation's duty to protect their citizens from human rights violations. That includes government, national security forces, and any type of government organization who is involved in dealing with its citizens and dealing with its political activities, political demonstrations. Now, the Human Rights Watch has reported that the situation in Tibet in Western China has improved over the past decade. However, this area remains one of the more prevalent areas where Chinese government human rights violations have occurred. Now, Tibetan nationalism, it forms the basis of the movement against the Chinese government. However, the Chinese government continues to persecute the protesters and continues to create heinous human rights violations within Tibet. Now, from the Human Rights perspective, Human Rights Watch's perspective, we are not endorsing any particular type of political entity within Tibet. However, the Human Rights Watch does protect and overwatch the basic human rights of every citizen in the world. Now, unfortunately, gross violations of human rights remain a continuing fixture within Tibet. And this is despite of all the involvement of all the non-government organizations and intergovernment organizations, including the United States and Tibet. Now, these NGOs focus to contain the problem and to focus their attention with the Chinese government in cooperation with the Tibetan exiles, the Dalai Lama, and the Tibetan nationals that still remain within the country.
A distinguished representative of China, you have a point of order.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, I don't like to repeat what I have said, but still I'm forced to repeat what I have said, and to repeat as you just have already clarified. This is a general item. This is a general debate on the item 8. As you just clarified, no speaker should selectively select one issue and comment only on one issue. I thank you, Mr. President.
Now, what are the causes of these unprecedented acts of protest in China, within Tibet as well? Now, you have Buddhist priests and Buddhist movements setting themselves on fire, self-immolation for this movement, and honestly, this brings to light the issue that within Tibet and from the human rights perspective, it's a crisis that needs to be solved, and it cannot be solved unless there's intergovernment cooperation and intergovernment organizational solution to this problem. And within Tibet itself, the Chinese government has censored all sorts of protests from the Tibetan nationalist movement, and there's very little coming out of Tibet in terms of reporting. However, the Human Rights Watch and other organizations that are concerned with the human rights violations in Tibet, we do get some information, and the information that's coming out is terrible, and some of it in terms of Chinese involvement in arresting protesters and things like that. I mean, they have arbitrary arrest and torture and detentions, but also violations of freedom of religion, which is a basic human right for all people in the world. And within China and within Tibet, it's being violated. And Tibetans are forbidden from freely practicing Buddhism, and it's an issue that needs to be solved. And within the international regimes concerning human rights, there needs to be a consensus with the UN Human Rights Commission and other human rights activists in order to solve this problem that's continuing to occur within Tibet. And that's all that the Human Rights Watch has to report on this issue.